All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Monday night, everybody. For those of you who watched our Monday morning video earlier today, we're going to be doing our season preview predictions today, just kind of league-wide. There's some specific predictions that I want to nail down. Who will win the East? Who will win the West? Who will win the NBA title? I want to talk a little bit about that specific NBA Finals matchup that I am predicting. I want to talk about which team I expect to overachieve the most, which team I expect to underachieve the most, who will win MVP, and then at the very end, I want to spend some time talking about the Lakers because their opening schedule to start the season is incredibly difficult, and it's very possible that they get off to a very poor start, which could lead to a bunch of potential ramifications. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about them at the end. You guys know the drill before we get started. Subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements as well as footage breakdowns. There's a couple of specific breakdowns I plan on doing this Wednesday of the opening night games. A lot of footage and stuff that'll be on my Twitter feed, so you're going to want to follow me there. And then last but not least, if for whatever reason you guys miss one of these videos and you can't get back over to YouTube to finish them, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. And on that note, let's talk some basketball. So when we're talking about who's going to win the NBA title, we kind of are narrowing it down to 4 teams. And I feel like most people probably agree with me there. And we also got a similar type of feedback from the NBA GM survey, which picked these same 4 teams as the teams most likely to win the title. That would be the Warriors, the Bucks, the Celtics, and the Clippers. Now, to be clear up front, all 4 of those teams have flaws. This is not the 2017 Warriors, the 2018 Warriors. This is not a clear-cut favorite type of season. This is a season where we have multiple teams that are on that top tier of the league. The Warriors and the Bucks, for instance, don't quite have as much total roster talent as the Clippers and the Celtics do, in my opinion. But the Clippers and the Celtics, they don't have Giannis and Steph, the 2 best players in the entire world. So their top tier talent's not quite as good. I think the Warriors' core lineups have some undersized perimeter defenders, which can lead to specific problems in specific matchups, although they managed to get by past that problem this past season. The Bucks have pretty unreliable role players spotting up on the perimeter. That really hurt them against Boston. That was their biggest weakness last year. The Celtics, their 2 stars, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, are both pretty unreliable decision makers, right? Like you don't trust them in big moments not to make, crippling mistakes. So that's the Celtics' big problem. Then we go to the Clippers, and I think particularly their role player wings, the wings they have around Kawhi and Paul George, are a little bit slow-footed, which could put them into some problems against teams that are quicker on the perimeter. So when I'm looking at those top 4 teams, they all have flaws. They all have strengths. There's no clear-cut team that's above all of them. So who is the safest bet if you had to pick one of those 4 teams? And the Warriors, and I've talked about this a lot when we had them number 1 in our power rankings, and we talked about them during the preseason. The reason why I picked the Warriors as who I think is going to win the title this year is they have the best combination of factors that make them the safest bet. They have the best combination of upper management, should they need to sign buyout players or make a trade in the middle of the season, a competent coaching staff that caters their philosophy towards the roster as opposed to their, stubborn ideologies about basketball. They also cater their ideologies towards things that work in the modern NBA. I also trust their coaching staff more than the other 3 teams on that list to make pivotal adjustments in a playoff series, like putting Draymond Green on Jaylen Brown, for instance. Those kinds of things. I trust their coaching staff the most. Their superstar talent. I'm getting Steph Curry in this case, who I believe is the 2nd best player in the world. Quality role players. And then this is the big one. Continuity and experience. Knowing how to play together and knowing how to win playoff series because they've won so damn many of them over the years. They've won coming from behind. They've won in dominant fashion. They've won in 2014-15. They've won in 2022, right? They just have And when we're talking about all of those factors, all of those teams that we just mentioned have strengths or weaknesses in certain parts of those factors, but the Warriors are the best of those four in all of them combined. If I'm looking for the best combination of management, coaching, star talent, role players, continuity, and experience, the Warriors are just the safest bet. That doesn't mean they will win, but it makes them the safest bet out of those four. So I'm picking the Warriors, to be clear, right here. The eve of the start of the season, I am picking the Warriors to win the NBA title. So who will win the West? Obviously the Warriors. Probably over the Clippers in the Western Conference Finals would be my guess, but who knows how injuries will play a role in seeding as things go along. In the end, I've always viewed the Clippers as the biggest threat out west to beat the Warriors because they have such great perimeter size, and the Warriors' specific weakness is perimeter size on the defensive end of the floor. So even though I view the Clippers as their biggest threat, and I view them as the team that'll play against them in the Western Conference Finals, I think that one of the biggest reasons why I'd pick the Warriors over the Clippers in that matchup is, in the end, I think it'll be the gap in foot speed that kills them. We talked about this, but when you look at, the Clippers are known for this team being this team that has a ton of wings that can guard multiple positions and do multiple things on the offensive end of the floor, right? So if I've got, and I need to get past Kawhi and Paul George for a second, I got to start looking at Marcus Morris and Nick Batum and Robert Covington, right? Like I'm getting into this list of these kind of older wings, and yes, they can guard multiple positions. Yes, they have a history of being good role players at their positions, but they're starting to get to the point where they're a little bit more slow-footed than they used to be. And particularly when you're guarding the Warriors, who are going to put you through a plethora of actions during every single game, way more actions than any other team is going to run, and then so much cutting and running off of screens and covering a ton of ground. They're a player movement offense. With how much they move around, it's going to be particularly tough for the Clippers to keep up with them with their slower feet. So that would be why I'd pick the Warriors over the Clippers to win the Western Conference. So who will win the East? So this is my big switch up from the power rankings. Again, I don't see the point in being married to a pick. You should react to new information, or if you have a change of heart, you should embrace that, in my opinion. I had originally picked Boston because of the Malcolm Brogdon acquisition. I thought it addressed their ball handling concerns, and I thought that it was an indicator of a philosophy that I like too, which is push your chips in the middle. Do your best to be the best that you can be because other teams are consistently getting better around you. It bothered me that the Bucks really didn't do anything this summer, and then the Celtics were like, hey, we suck at ball handling. Let's go get Malcolm Brogdon. He can dribble the basketball. I liked that about Boston, and that's why I picked them. However, I really don't want to be sitting on my couch in May watching the Eastern Conference Finals feeling like an idiot for picking against Giannis. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I think he's the best player in the world on a tier by himself. I think he's made strides as a passer particularly that make him unstoppable on the offensive end in a way that he didn't used to be. And then I also think he's the best defensive player in the world. So from that standpoint, especially, and I got to give them a little bit more credit. I said that the Celtics addressed their biggest weakness, which was ball handling, right? Well, the Bucks had a big weakness in off-ball shooting. Their inability to knock down shots when the Celtics loaded up on Giannis, particularly at the end of that series, really killed them. And I don't think we're factoring in enough to how the return of Chris Middleton taking, 40 playoff minutes a night from one of those weaker spot-up players, and the influx of guys like Joe Ingles, for instance, as significant upgrades at that specific flaw that they had last year. So even though a lot of the things with my brain are pointing me towards Boston, my gut is telling me don't pick against Giannis. And so from that standpoint, before the season, before we've seen any basketball, I am going to be picking the Bucks over the Celtics to win the Eastern Conference, which means I'm expecting a Warriors-Bucks NBA Finals, which I think would be most NBA fans' dream because it's such an interesting matchup. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about that particular matchup. So first of all, starts with Draymond versus Giannis. We have, if I talked a lot about, over the summer when we were talking about player rankings, when we were talking about Giannis and how, uniquely he just destroys your stereotypical perimeter defenders, right? Like if I was ranking the best perimeter defenders in the world, I've got, Ben Simmons, Andrew Wiggins, Jason Tatum, Mikal Bridges, maybe a couple other guys. Outside of Ben Simmons, who actually has done a pretty decent job on Giannis, those other three guys are hopeless guarding Giannis. Like if you put Mikal Bridges, Jason Tatum, or Jaylen Brown on Giannis for a playoff series, they would get obliterated. And it's just kind of the unique matchup problem that Giannis causes because of how big and strong he is, right? Well, I talked a lot over the summer. If you were building a defender in a lab to guard Giannis, the two guys that came to mind to me were LeBron James and Draymond Green, because they are incredibly strong for their specific position, and they have the unique ability through instincts and craftiness to even defend above what their strength level is. That's what made LeBron capable of guarding all 5 positions when he was in his prime, and still a little bit to this day. And Draymond Green, even though he's, my height, is one of the best defensive players of all time because of his unique combination of strength, low center of gravity, instincts, the ability to slide his feet. The other big thing that would make that tough for Giannis in particular is Giannis would have to kind of beat him with his brain as much as he does with his body, because over the course of that series, Draymond's going to pick up on his go-to moves. If he gets beat on a specific move, he's going to make a mental note of it. Draymond loves that chess match of defense and identifying little things that he can fix and rectify to become a better defender over the course of a series. That specific matchup, that Draymond versus Giannis matchup, would be such an incredibly interesting basketball matchup to watch. And then the other big part of that series that would be tough is the traditional drop coverage that Milwaukee would inevitably run against Steph Curry. And we literally saw that against Boston last year. They baited Steph into pull-up jump shooting when he's the best pull-up jump shooter in the world. I can't remember the exact numbers, but the Warriors averaged around like 20, 21 pull-up jump shots per game last year in the regular season. And that bumped up to 28 against Boston because they're not stubborn. They will do what they have to do to beat your particular coverages, and they have the guys to do it. In this case, Steph Curry. And then obviously we've talked a lot about how Jordan Poole has turned into a really good high-volume pull-up jump shooter as well. It's two incredibly different teams, and whichever style controls the game will end up winning. And again, I'd pick Golden State for all the reasons we just talked about. They're the best combination of management and coaching, star talent, role players, continuity experience, all that stuff. They're the safer bet. But man, would that be an interesting NBA Finals series, and I hope that this is the year that we get to see it. So, what team do I expect to overachieve the most? I'm going with Philly. Now, everyone's pretty low on Philly for a bunch of obvious reasons, right? Like James Harden's playoff history, which is well documented, and it really is a problem. He's one of the biggest playoff underachievers relative to his regular season success in NBA history. It's a legitimate concern with him, right? We also have James Harden's recent decline. He just hasn't looked much like himself at all over the last couple of years. Then we have with Joel Embiid, his injury history. He's always hurt. And then he kind of has some bad body language stuff when things go south in the playoffs. And then we have Doc Rivers, who also has a history of blowing playoff series. So we have this list of obvious red flags that are kind of deflecting a lot of attention away from the Sixers. And there's some legitimacy to that. Like, for instance, I don't have them in my top tier of contenders, but I think they're just as talented, which we'll talk about in a second. So obviously I'm factoring that in as well, and we should not gloss over that stuff entirely, but we do, in a lot of cases like this, overlook the good that comes with the Sixers. For one, they're every bit as talented as the best teams in the league. I would argue they have the most talented top 4 out of any team in the league. If you've got Joel Embiid, James Harden, Tobias Harris, and Tyrese Maxey, you'd be hard-pressed to find a top 4 that's as good. There are other good top 4s in the league, and I would pick the top 4 teams in the league as better teams than the Sixers. But in terms of talent, they're right up there in that conversation. And I also expect James Harden to have his best season since 2019. We talked about this a ton over the course of the summer, but I just think I I think that his lack of success over the last couple of years has caused him to come to terms with some of the realities of his body changing as he's getting older. I think he's going to be in better shape this year. I think his hamstring will hold up as a result. I think over the course of the season, he'll get in even better shape, and I think he'll regain some of that burst. He's like my age. He's like 32 years old. This dude is not, this is not a washed up old veteran. Yes, he's lived a hard life, but there's lots of basketball left in James Harden's legs, and if he can get his conditioning back, I don't see any reason why he can't have a bounce back season. And then anytime you have a player the talent level of Joel Embiid, who I think is the 8th best player in the world, you can't ever discount a healthy Joel Embiid playoff run and if he's dominant enough, how that could put the Sixers in position to win a lot of big games. So they're really just a not so long shot to win the East. That's why I have them as the team I expect to overachieve. All right, the team I expect to underachieve. I am going with the Suns. So first of all, they benefited from a great deal of injury luck in the 2021 playoffs. They beat the Lakers without Anthony Davis. They beat the Nuggets without Jamal Murray. They beat the Clippers without Kawhi Leonard. And then they beat the Bucks twice when Giannis was his first 2 games back from a hyperextended knee. And then Giannis just literally ran roughshod over them and beat them 4 times in a row. But we flowed directly from that into 2022, which was a season where the West was historically weak because a bunch of teams were down for various reasons. Clippers were down because of Kawhi. The Lakers were down because of LeBron and AD getting hurt all the time. The Nuggets were down because Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray were out. It was just a weak Western Conference in that particular year, and they won a ton of regular season games. But then they got into the playoffs and looked somewhat less than dominant against a really good, exciting young New Orleans Pelicans team. And then they lost in really embarrassing fashion, humiliating fashion to the Dallas Mavericks. So there's some kind of like weird residual energy from that. Then we have DeAndre Ayton's contract situation that was very strange, clearly wanted to go to the Pacers. He has beef with Monty Williams, which may or may not get resolved at some point. Chris Paul is turning into one of the oldest players in the league, and he's undersized, which can always be that can be an issue for younger players, let alone players in his position. And then just in general, the West is much, much better this year. We've got the return of the Nuggets to full strength, the return of the Lakers to their version of full strength, the return of the Clippers to full strength. The Minnesota Timberwolves made a big-time trade. They have more talent than they did last year. Then we've got young teams like New Orleans coming up that I expect to capitalize on some of their success from the end of the year last year. I seriously considered New Orleans for my overachieving team. Sacramento, with the acquisition of Kevin Huerter, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but the young wing that they drafted that I really like, who's been killing it in preseason. They're an interesting team. The West is much, much tougher this year. What does that translate to? It means night in and night out. Keegan Murray, by the way, is his name. Sorry, I get terrible with names randomly. I have a good memory sometimes and horrible memory others. It's really frustrating. But night in and night out, the schedule in the Western Conference is just going to be a lot tougher than it was last year. Did you know that last year the Suns won 33 of their games requiring crunch time to win, which was most in the league by a mile? The Raptors were second with 26. What that means is, yes, the Suns were dominant, but these games were close and were competitive, and they were winning often because Chris Paul just made enough plays at the end of the game, or Devin Booker just made enough plays at the end of the game. That means they're not blowing teams out. This wasn't the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics beat the crap out of everybody last year. The Suns were winning in close games. So when you have a night in, night out tougher schedule, some weird baggage kind of lingering around the team, and a team that already was thriving on other teams getting hurt and or winning in tight game environments at the end, there's just a lot of reasons why this could swing the other way. More accurately, I'd say it wouldn't take much for this to swing the other way. Now, they're still super talented enough to win a whole lot of games, even if Chris Paul misses time, even if Devin Booker misses time. But with the drama underneath the surface, it won't take much for this team to fracture. And when they fracture, they lose the buy-in. When they lose the buy-in, the defensive end slips and the offensive ball movement slips. Look at what happened to the Lakers last year when they didn't buy into Frank Vogel. Even with as much talent as they have, it's not completely unrealistic that they could go 45-37 because some of those games don't go their way. And then in the West this year, that might be a play-in team, which is a really far cry from being the undisputed best team in the regular season last year. So I have the Suns as the team I expect to underachieve. All right, who do I think is going to win MVP? I'm picking Giannis. The Luka pick just doesn't make much sense to me. I do not understand why he's so heavily favored. The Dallas Mavericks had a weird offseason. They lost one of their primary ball handlers, didn't get another one in return. Christian Wood is now going to come off the bench for them. It's a funky team. I like them still as a playoff threat, but I do not see them as a team that's going to win enough regular season games to win an MVP this year. And then when you look at Giannis, it's kind of shaping up to be the perfect set of circumstances for him to win an MVP. First of all, his team is going to win a ton of games, and they're going to be one of the top seeds. That's just a reality of the Bucks roster. He'll put up ridiculous counting stats, like he always does. He'll put up ridiculous advanced metrics, the catch-alls and stuff, which I don't personally care about, but there are a lot of MVP voters who do, so you have to factor that in here. He's the best defensive player in basketball. MVP voters love that. They love players who play both ends of the floor. He tries hard every night. That's incredibly important to MVP because MVP voters have always discounted the veterans, the guys who've been around a long time because they don't try hard often enough. And then most importantly, he hasn't won an MVP since 2020. So it will be fresh to the voters. You won't pay that tax, that LeBron tax that we used to talk about all those years ago, where it's just like you're so dominant for so long that like your bar is just different than everyone else, and a lot of your success goes kind of under the table. I think Giannis, and I believe at FanDuel he's plus 700, although that line might have moved since I last looked. But I think he's shaping up for just a textbook revenge campaign. Everybody just remembers how dominant he is. The Bucks win a ton of games. They're the 1 seed in the East or the 2 seed in the East. He's clearly the best player in the world, and everyone just finally relents and gives him an MVP. So I think Giannis is actually a really, really smart bet, especially at that kind of odds to win the MVP this year. All right, last thing before we get out of here. I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the Lakers' opening schedule because this is insane. Because they're the team that I think has the most up in the air in the early phases of the season, and a team that has really divergent paths. Because the Lakers have like a long shot chance to win the title, right? If some things shape out, they make a trade with Russ, they get a couple of good role players back. LeBron and AD both play like top 5 players. Like, yeah, you're dumb if you don't think they can win a title if things go that way. But they also have like a bunch of different ways that it could go south, and they could miss the playoffs entirely, not even necessarily just because of injuries, right? So they have like a wide range of outcomes. But I do think it's really interesting how tough their schedule is to start the year, which is very different from last year. Last year, I remember their schedule was just stacked with cupcakes for the first basically like month of the season, and the Lakers still underperformed against that particular schedule. So for starters, start the season against the Warriors on Tuesday, and then they turn around and play the Clippers on Thursday. They'll be significant underdogs in both games. They could play well and go 0-2 in both of those games. Then they play the Blazers. That's a game they should win, but it'll be a tough game. Then their next 4 are Nuggets, Wolves, Nuggets, Pelicans. That's 4 really tough games, and 2 of them are on the road. Particularly those first 2 against the Nuggets and Wolves are on the road. And then 3 of their next 6 after that are against the Cavs, Clippers, and Nets. 3 teams that I had very high in my power rankings. So they will be like, and again, even if you believe in the Lakers ceiling, which I do, even if you believe in that, they're at a massive continuity disadvantage right now. They did not get a ton of time playing together in preseason because Anthony Davis was dealing with some back stuff. And they had some important players, a wing I expect them to play a lot, and Troy Brown Jr. was out with injury for a while. Dennis Schroeder was dealing with a visa situation, and then he just broke his finger or thumb or something like that. So he's going to be out for a while. Like they are going to be at a massive continuity disadvantage in every single one of those games. They're building this from scratch, essentially. So they could very easily be under 500 through 13 games. That schedule that I just laid out for you is their first 13 games. There's a version of that story where they beat the three bad, because I think they have 2 matchups with the Pistons and like one with the Spurs in there, and then maybe they beat the Blazers. There's 4 wins. But what about those other 9 games there? What if they win 3 of those, right? Like there's a version of this where they could be 7-6, 6-7. They could very easily be under 500 through 13 games, even if they play well, because of the continuity disadvantage and because of how difficult the schedule is. Now, for me personally, I would preach patience there. And I would say, look, you have a really tough schedule. You don't have continuity. You need to weather this storm a little bit. You'll hit your stride later on in the season. That would be what I would say. But this is the Lakers, a team that's under a great deal of pressure, that has this Russell Westbrook situation hanging over them. Now Russell Westbrook's coming off the bench. I've heard from people that are involved with the team that it probably is a precursor, kind of like a last chance. Like if he can't succeed in this role, then they would consider sending him home until a trade gets found. So like the reality is this first 13 games, with the combination of the drama and the difficulty of the schedule, things could go south pretty quickly. And so there's 2 ways that it could go from there. One, it could goad them into feeling enough urgency to finally trade Russ, which would be good. But the flip side of that is it could also goad them into thinking that this team is a lost cause. And if they get convinced that this team is a lost cause, they could decide to do nothing. And if that's the case, then now you're punting a season of LeBron James in year 20 and a season of Anthony Davis under contract in his 20s. I think it would be a huge mistake, because especially these early season losses would be just as much a byproduct of continuity as it would be about talent. The big swing factor there, the one that we've got to keep an eye on, is how good do LeBron James and Anthony Davis look? Because if you're 6-7, but LeBron and AD look fantastic, that will goad them into trading the picks and getting role players around them before it's too late. But if LeBron and AD don't look great, it could go the opposite direction. And that could be the everything they need to feel like this team is worth punting on. But yeah, it's going to be interesting watching the Lakers to start the season. It could go south quickly with how tough their schedule is. But those are my picks to start the season. Obviously, I'm not married to anything. It's just where I'm at right now. And again, with predictions, and I tell you guys this all the time, predictions are just predictions. They're guesses. If I was right all the time, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd be in Vegas betting on these things. And I don't know many professional gamblers out there, because it really is that difficult to predict sports. That's why we love sports so much. So much is up in the air. But I'm always going to give you guys my predictions, because I'm not afraid of being wrong, and I'm just going to do my best and base it on my analysis and base it on the things that I see on tape. But I'm very, very excited just to give you guys an idea of the schedule coming up. Again, tomorrow night, right after Lakers-Warriors, we'll be going live. Wednesday, keep an eye during the day for a film breakdown on Tuesday night's games with footage that's on my Twitter feed. Thursday night will be a combination of instant reaction to Lakers-Clippers and the other national TV game from that night, as well as breakdown of Wednesday night's games. We'll get to see I believe the Nets play that night on Wednesday night as well. So live show Tuesday night, show during the day on Wednesday. Live show Thursday night, show during the day on Friday. That's our kind of schedule for the rest of the week. As always, I sincerely appreciate your guys' support. I am so excited to embark on this long 9-month journey with you guys and to see what we can build this into. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you tomorrow night for the season opener. I'm stoked. It's going to be fun. Let's do it.